The war had been going on for so long that most people had forgotten how life felt before it. Peace had become a distant memory, almost like a story told by grandparents that no one fully believed anymore. Every day, people woke up hoping things might finally get better, but all they found were more losses, more fear, and more silent streets where families once lived. The world felt tired, as if the air itself carried the weight of endless struggle. At a small defense outpost on the edge of a ruined city, a commander named Elias stood on what used to be the main watchtower. The concrete beneath his boots was cracked, the railing bent out of shape. The place had been hit many times, but somehow it always remained standing, just like the people inside it. They were the last group still pushing back on that front. Not the strongest, not the best equipped, not even the most trained. Just the last ones who hadn't given up yet. Elias looked out at the empty landscape. Trees had turned to dry trunks, buildings had lost their roofs, and roads were broken in so many places they were nearly impossible to use. The sun rose slowly behind a cloud of dust, making the sky look more orange than blue. It was almost calm, almost peaceful. But everyone knew it was only the quiet before things got worse. Inside the base, the atmosphere was different. People walked quickly, carrying equipment, bandages, or whatever supplies they had left. They spoke in low voices, not out of fear, but exhaustion. Every person had dark circles under their eyes. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone had sacrificed too much. Elias moved down the stairs and entered the operations room, where a few officers studied maps that barely mattered anymore. The lines kept shifting every day, and the enemy always seemed to push forward no matter what the defenders tried. The maps had so many rewritten markings that some parts were unreadable. Even the communication radios crackled with a tired sound, as if the machines themselves were worn out. One of the younger officers looked up as Elias walked in. He hesitated before speaking, almost embarrassed. "We received another update," he said quietly. "The northern units. They're gone. There's no one left holding that area." Elias nodded. He had expected it, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the stomach. Losing those units meant the enemy would soon be at their doorstep. There was no backup coming, no reinforcements. No secret strategy that would suddenly turn the war around. For the first time, even he found himself thinking the words no leader ever wanted to say out loud. "We can't win," but he didn't say them. He simply placed a hand on the officer's shoulder and told him to rest for a bit. Everyone needed rest. Everyone needed a moment to breathe. Later, as Elias walked through the medical area, he saw a group of civilians gathered near a heater. Most were older folks, though some children sat with them, leaning against their parents. They had been evacuated from different villages and towns when the fighting got too close. Their faces told stories, without using word stories, of running from one place to another, of losing their homes, of hoping the space might be safe at least for a little while. One of the children, a girl with short hair and a blanket wrapped around her, looked up at Elias and asked, "Is the war going to end soon?" He paused. What answer could he possibly give? The truth would crush her. A lie would feel unfair. So he knelt down and simply said, "We're doing everything we can, and we won't stop trying." It wasn't a promise of victory. It wasn't a false hope. It was simply the only honest thing he could say. That evening, when the sky turned dark and the wind carried the chill of early nightfall, Elias joined a small group in the strategy room. They weren't soldiers, but scholars, historians, researchers, and scientists who had been studying old legends long before the war began. Most soldiers didn't understand why they were there, but Elias did. He had called them. They were his last idea, the one thing no one else had dared suggest, because it sounded more like fantasy than military planning. But desperate times made even impossible things worth considering. On the table in front of them lay a stack of old texts. cracked tablets, and faded papers that were found in different corners of the world. The scholars had been gathering them for months, scribbling notes, comparing symbols, and searching for patterns. One of them, an older researcher with soft eyes and a calm voice, pointed at a sketch of a large figure carved into an ancient stone. "This appears in multiple cultures," he said. "Different names, different descriptions, but the idea is the same. A group of beings said to have helped humanity long ago. They weren't gods, more like guardians." Another scholar added, "Some stories say they intervened when the world faced destruction, but only when humans called for them with the proper rites." Someone else shook their head, skeptical. "But these are myths, stories. We have no proof any of it is real." The room fell silent for a moment. Elias watched them, noticing how each of them looked both hopeful and afraid. Hopeful because this legend was the only path forward that didn't end in defeat. Afraid because if the legend turned out to be nothing more than a tale, then humanity truly had no chance left. "We've tried everything else," Elias finally said. "We don't have the strength to continue fighting. Not physically, not mentally. If there is even the smallest chance that these ancient ones existed, then we have to try." The older researcher opened a notebook filled with hand-drawn symbols. "There might be a place," he said, "a ruined site in the desert. Old carvings there match several of the texts. If the stories are true, that location might hold instructions on how to reach the ancient ones." Elias nodded slowly. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or ashamed. Relieved that there was a plan in a plan. Ashamed that humanity had been reduced to hoping for help from beings that might not even exist. A desperation does something strange to the human spirit. It makes people bold. It pushes them to step beyond logic, beyond doubt, beyond fear. And right then, boldness was the only resource left out as the scholars packed their notes and prepared for a journey that could change the fate of the world. Elias stepped outside to look at the night sky. Stars flickered behind layers of dust, barely visible. The moon shone weakly, like a too tired dot. He wondered what his ancestors would think if they saw the world now. Would they be proud that people were still fighting? Or would they be saddened by how much had been lost? Behind him, one of the researchers approached. She had been quiet all evening, listening more than speaking. She now stood beside him, hands tucked in her coat pockets. "You know," she said softly, "if these legends are true, it means our ancestors believed in something bigger than themselves. Maybe they weren't foolish." Elias glanced at her. "Do you really think we'll find anything out there?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know that your people need something to hope for. And even if the ancient ones don't exist, the belief that we tried everything, that might matter too." He appreciated her honesty. No empty promises, no exaggerated certainty. Just truth mixed with courage. The night grew colder, and the base lights flickered due to low power. The hum of the generators sounded weaker than usual. Supplies were running out. Time was running out even faster. Yet somewhere inside Elias, a spark returned. A small one, but enough to make him feel something he hadn't felt in months, a sense of direction. The next morning, the expedition team gathered their gear. They carried water, tools, and the collection of texts that might lead them to the answer. Soldiers watched them leave with a mix of confusion and hope. No one knew exactly where they were going, only that it was dangerous and far as the transport vehicle rumbled toward the desert. Elias stood by the entrance of the base, watching until it disappeared beyond a line of broken buildings. He didn't know whether they would return, or whether the ancient ones were real, or whether this plan would lead to a miracle or a dead end. He only knew one thing: the war was nearly lost, and if humanity had even the smallest chance left, it was now in the hands of those searching for something older than history itself. The journey to the desert ruins began before sunrise. The air was still cool, and a thin layer of fog clung to the ground as the small team loaded their supplies onto the old transport truck. The engine sputtered a little before starting, as if it already knew the road ahead would not be kind. None of the travelers complained, though. Everyone understood the importance of this mission, even if they didn't fully understand the legends behind it. Dr. Mira, the archaeologist who had studied the ancient texts her entire life, double-checked the boxes of tools, notebooks, and preserved papers before climbing into the back of the vehicle. She handled every item carefully, like each piece carried the weight of the whole world. And in a way, it did. Because if the stories were real, the instructions hidden in those documents might be their last hope. As the truck pulled away from the safety of the outpost, Elias watched from a distance. He didn't wave, didn't call out. He simply stood still, hands behind his back, eyes following the vehicle until the dust swallowed it. Everyone in the base felt the tension of that moment. It was as if a silent prayer had been released into the cold morning air. Inside the truck, Mira sat beside two assistants and an older historian who often rubbed his hands together when deep in thought. They bounced lightly with every bump on the road, but no one complained. Most of the ride passed in quiet observation. Through the dusty windows, they saw broken towns, collapsed bridges, and stretches of land with no signs of life. It was strange to think that not long ago, children had played on these streets, and families had walked through these towns without fear. Hours later, as they moved farther away from what remained of civilization, the landscape changed. The dry earth turned into wide open desert. Dunes stretched for miles, shaped by winds that never tired. The sky above was clear and painfully bright. The sun had taken control now, burning down on them with no mercy. The heat made the air shimmer, making distant shapes look like illusions. One of the assistants wiped his forehead. Hard to believe people once lived out here. They didn't live here, Mara said softly. They worshipped here, or feared something here. The legends aren't always clear. The older historian raised his head. Legends rarely give straight answers. But symbols don't lie. We'll find what we came for. His confidence brought a small sense of comfort to the group, though none of them knew exactly what they wanted to find. The ancient ones were described differently in every region. Some called them protectors, others called them watchers. A few stories even suggested they were neither good nor bad, but simply powerful beings who only acted when the world reached a breaking point. As the truck continued deeper into the desert, the road became rougher. The wheels rolled over uneven ground, and sometimes the entire vehicle rocked from side to side. The wind blew sand across the windshield, grinding against the glass like tiny sharp grains. At times it felt like the desert wanted to swallow them whole. Late in the afternoon, they stopped to rest. There was no shade, no trees, nothing but sand and sky. The group set up a small canvas sheet to block the sun and shared water from metal containers. Even the water tasted warm. The air felt dry enough to crack skin. The assistant looked out across the dunes and said quietly, "Do you think the stories are true?" Mira didn't answer immediately. She took a sip of water and then looked up at the assistant with calm but tired eyes. "I don't know if the stories are true," she said, "but I know people believe them. And sometimes belief is the last thing that keeps hope alive." The older historian nodded. "And sometimes belief is a doorway," he added. "A doorway to something we can't see yet." They packed their supplies again and continued. The sun slowly moved toward the horizon, and the heat softened, replaced by a cool breeze that felt almost kind. Night in the desert came quickly. The sky shifted from bright gold to deep purple, and stars appeared one by one like tiny lanterns. Without city lights, the sky looked endless. Mira studied the constellation overhead. She had seen drawings of the same stars carved into ancient stones, forming patterns that guided travelers long before maps existed. "Do you see that?" she asked the group. "Those stars. They match one of the diagrams in the old tablet." The others followed her gaze, tracing the shapes with their eyes. They formed what looked like a curved line with 3 bright points at the end. "That cluster," she said, "is mentioned in multiple stories about the ancient ones. Some believed it was their home. Others thought it was a sign of their return." The assistant looked a little uneasy. "A sign? Like something that announces them?" "Maybe," Mira replied. "Or maybe it's just how ancient people made sense of the sky." The older historian smiled faintly. "Every culture uses the sky to understand its place in the world. Maybe we're doing the same now." The night grew colder as they pressed forward. At times, the truck had to slow to crawl because the sand was too deep. At other times, they passed large rocks or ruined pillars sticking out of the ground signs that long ago something had been built here. Something forgotten by most. They reached the ruins just before dawn. The first light of the sun cast soft orange shadows across cracked stone walls and broken pillars half buried in the sand. The place looked ancient, older than any structure Myra had studied in modern times. The carvings on the stones were faded, but still visible. Lines, circles, figures with elongated limbs. Symbols that resembled neither letters nor numbers. As they stepped out of the truck, the air felt strangely still, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Mira walked slowly toward the tallest, remaining structure, a stone entrance carved into the shape of 2 figures standing side by side. Their faces were worn down by time, but their posture remained strong, almost protective. "This is it," she whispered. The others spread out to examine the area. The older historian brushed away sand from a carved tablet on the ground, revealing more symbols. The assistants set up lanterns and tools. As Mira traced her fingers over the stone figures, she felt something she couldn't explain, a sense of being watched, but not threatened. It was like the ruins held memories of the past and were waiting for someone to unlock them. The team spent hours exploring, taking notes, matching symbols to the texts they had brought. Sometimes the wind carried soft echoes that made them turn around suddenly, only to find empty air. Other times, the ground felt as if it hummed gently beneath their feet, though none of them mentioned it out loud. Around midday, one of the assistants found a hidden staircase leading down into a chamber buried under layers of sand. They cleared the entrance carefully and then descended with lanterns in hand. Inside, the chamber was cool and quiet. The walls were covered in carvings that looked much clearer than the ones outside. They appeared to tell a story, humans reaching out toward tall, glowing figures. Storms breaking across the sky. A world in chaos. And the ancient ones descending to help restore balance. Myra's heart pounded as she studied the carvings. She recognized some symbols from the old documents. She followed the images step by step until she reached the final carving, a circle with lines extending outward, surrounding a figure standing in the center. It looked like a summoning ritual, though the word itself felt too dramatic. It appeared more like a call for help, a plea from humanity to something beyond human understanding. "This is it," she whispered again. This is what we came to find." But not everyone felt relief. The assistant swallowed hard and said, "If this is real, what if calling them brings something worse?" The historian shook his head. "We don't know what they were, but we know our world is falling apart. We have no choice but to try." Myra didn't speak. She simply touched the final carving with her fingertips. The stone felt warm, as if it had waited centuries for someone to return to it. Outside the chamber, the desert wind picked up again, carrying sand across the ruins in swirling patterns. The sky darkened slightly as clouds drifted overhead. The team climbed out of the chamber with their notes. their hearts filled with a strange mix of fear and hope. They now had the instructions. They now had the chance to try something ancient, something long forgotten. But they also knew the risk was enormous. They had no idea what would happen if they attempted the ritual. They didn't know if the Ancient Ones would answer, or if they even existed. As they prepared their equipment and studied the symbols one more time, Mira looked out across the desert and whispered to herself, "We've come this far. We can't turn back now." The fate of the world was no longer in the hands of armies or machines. It was now held by a small group standing in a forgotten desert, trying to awaken something older than human history. Their journey had only just begun. The desert remained strangely quiet the morning the team prepared to attempt the ancient ritual. The wind that usually carried sand across the ruins had calmed, almost as if the land itself sensed that something important was about to happen. The sky was pale blue, with thin white clouds drifting slowly across it, and the air felt cool for the first time in days. Mira stood near the center of the ruins, studying the carvings on the stone floor for what felt like the 100th time. She kept checking and rechecking the symbols, comparing them with the notes they had gathered from the underground chamber. Every curve, every angle, every tiny detail mattered. If they did anything wrong, they might lose the only chance humanity had left. The older historian approached her, carrying a small wooden box that held the items needed for the ritual. His hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from the weight of everything riding on their decisions. "You've memorized it all," he said gently. "Take a breath. We are ready." Mira exhaled slowly, grounding herself. "I know, it's just, if this works, the whole world changes. And if it doesn't, there may not be a world left to change." He gave her a comforting nod. "Then we do our best. That's all we can do." The two assistants were busy arranging the stones they had uncovered from the chamber. These stones weren't ordinary. They had faint marks etched into them, and under sunlight they reflected a soft shimmer that looked almost alive. Each stone had to be placed in an exact position to complete the circular pattern shown in the carvings. It took them the better part of an hour to arrange everything correctly. The desert sun climbed higher, but the air stayed strangely cool. Myra couldn't decide whether that was comforting or worrying. Once everything was ready, the team gathered around the center of the circle. Mira held the notebook with the translated instructions. Her voice shook slightly as she spoke. "Before we begin, we should be sure. This could be dangerous. We don't fully know what we're calling, or if anything will answer." The older historian replied softly, "The world is already breaking apart. Doing nothing is its own danger." The assistants nodded. No one wanted to turn back. They had come too far. They had seen how the last remaining cities were failing. They had heard the messages from Elias, describing how every day felt like running out of time. Myra took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the circle. The stones around her formed a wide ring, and each symbol seemed to faintly glow now that the pattern was complete. She placed her hand against the central carving, a smooth, circular stone untouched by time, and closed her eyes. The ritual wasn't loud or dramatic like stories often claimed. There were no shouts, no thunder, no flames. Instead, it required calmness, steady breath, and a sequence of spoken lines that had been carved into the ruins long ago. Mira began reading the lines in a slow, even voice. The language felt strange on her tongue, unfamiliar, yet oddly comforting. Each sound echoed lightly across the ruins, as if the air carried the words farther than her voice alone could. At first, nothing happened. The wind remained still. The sky remained bright. The ruins felt as silent as ever. One of the assistants shifted nervously. "Maybe we got something wrong." But before he finished speaking, the ground trembled just slightly, like a soft pulse beneath their feet. Myra stopped reading for a moment and looked around. The others stared at each other, eyes wide, wondering if the tremor was just their imagination. Then it happened again, a little stronger this time. Like the earth was waking from a deep sleep, Myra continued reciting the lines. Her voice grew steadier with each word. The trembling became more rhythmic, almost like a giant heartbeat rising from the ground itself. The sky slowly darkened, not in a threatening way, but as though light was being gently filtered. The air grew cooler, and a soft humming sound filled the space between the stones. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through their bones, through their thoughts, through the air itself. The assistant stepped back, overwhelmed but unable to look away. The older historian pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the hum resonate within him. Myra kept reading. The stone circle brightened. The symbols glowed more intensely, forming thin streams of light that rose into the air like ribbons. They twisted and rippled, connecting above the ritual circle to form a woven pattern of glowing threads. The ground shook once more, stronger this time, yet somehow the stones remained steady. As if held in place by something unseen. Myra finished the last line of the ritual and lowered her hands. Her breath came fast and shaky. She listened. For a moment, the world was silent again. Then a deep sound rolled through the air, not like thunder, not like wind, but like the echo of something ancient waking up after thousands of years. It wasn't frightening, just heavy, powerful, and full of meaning the human mind could barely grasp. The air above the circle shimmered. The woven light threads stretched upward like a growing pillar, reaching toward the sky, breaking through the clouds. The color shifted from white to gold, then to a deep blue. The pillar widened slowly, shaping itself into something like a doorway made of light. Everyone stared, frozen. No one dared blink. The first figure appeared inside the glowing doorway, like a silhouette forming behind a curtain of mist. It stood tall, taller than any human, its form bright and soft, not harsh or frightening. Its shape was vaguely human, but the edges shimmered as though made of starlight rather than flesh. It stepped forward, and with each step, the ground gave a soft, echoing pulse. Its face was calm, gentle even, not angry or stern. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with fire, but with something like ancient memory. Then another figure appeared behind it, and another, and another. A small group of these beings formed within the doorway, their presence neither violent nor threatening. They simply existed, old, wise, powerful, and deeply aware. Myra felt her knees weaken. The assistants held on to each other. The historian's eyes filled with tears. One of the beings stepped closest to Myra. It didn't speak with a mouth. Instead, its voice echoed directly inside their minds, soft and clear. You call for us. The words were simple, yet carried a depth that made Myra's heart pound. She managed to nod. Our world is falling apart, she whispered. We need help. We don't know what else to do. The being tilted its head slightly, as if listening to something beyond human hearing. The others remained still. For ages, the being said, you have forgotten our pact. Myra swallowed. We didn't know. The knowledge was lost. That is why you call now, the voice replied. You call at the edge of failure. The older historian stepped forward, his voice shaking. Will you help us? The beings exchanged a silent look. The air around them shimmered lightly. Then the first being spoke again. Help is not given freely. Balance must be maintained. A bond must be formed. Myra asked quietly, what kind of bond? The answer came gently, yet the meaning weighed heavily. A life force must anchor us. A living being who agrees to hold our presence. Without such an anchor, we cannot enter your world fully. It is the ancient law. The assistants looked terrified. The historian looked down at the ground. Myra's voice cracked. What happens to the anchor? They live, the being said. but their essence becomes connected to ours. Their strength becomes our path. Their future becomes uncertain. The team stood frozen, overwhelmed. The ritual had worked. The ancient ones were real. But the cost was real too. Mira knew there was only one person who could make that decision. Only one person who could take on such a burden. Elias. She looked toward the horizon, where the desert met the sky. We must return to the outpost, she said softly. Only our commander can decide this. The being stepped back slightly, allowing the glowing doorway to remain open. As if waiting for the final call, the ritual had succeeded. But the true choice, the choice that could save or doom humanity, was still ahead. The journey back to the outpost felt heavier than the journey to the ruins. The desert wind pushed against the truck as if warning them about the choice that lay ahead. No one spoke much. Each person was lost in their own thoughts, carrying the weight of what they had witnessed, beings made of light, voices that spoke without sound, and an offer that could change the fate of the world. Myra kept replaying the moment in her mind. The beings had stood there, calm and patient, offering help, but at a price no one had expected. She stared at her hands, still slightly shaking. She had touched ancient stones, spoken ancient words, and watched a doorway open to something beyond human understanding. But the hardest part was still ahead, returning to Elias and telling him what the ancient ones required. When the truck neared the outpost, the first thing they saw was Elias standing on the same watchtower where they had last seen him. His figure looked steady, though the lines on his face seemed deeper. When the truck stopped, he walked toward them with quick steps. "You're back," he said, relief and worry mixed in his voice. "What did you find?" Mira exchanged a look with the historian, then took a deep breath. "We found them," she said softly. "The ancient ones." Elias stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she was speaking truth or carrying the exhaustion of the desert. But he saw the seriousness in her eyes, and finally he nodded slowly. "Tell me everything." The team followed him into the operations room, where soldiers stood around, curious but respectful. Mira and the others explained the ritual, the ruins, the glowing symbols, and the beings who appeared from the pillar of light. They described the way the beings spoke and the calm presence they carried. The soldiers listened silently, their expressions shifting from disbelief to amazement, then to uncertainty. Then Mira explained the price, the anchor. Elias stood still, absorbing the information without reacting immediately. He didn't ask questions or interrupt. He simply lowered his head slightly, thinking, "So they need one life connected to them," he said finally. "One person to act as a bridge." "Yes," Mira replied. "Not in a harmful way, but in a binding way." They didn't seem cruel, but they were clear about the rule. "And without this anchor," Elias continued, "they cannot help us." "That's what they said," the historian confirmed. "This is how balance is kept. They cannot enter our world freely." The room grew quiet. A few soldiers exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. There was something sacred, something heavy, in the silence. Elias sat down slowly, his hands clasped in front of him. For a moment, he looked like a tired man unsure of where to step next. Then he straightened, his voice steady. "If this bond is required, then someone must accept it." He looked around the room and added, "But I won't ask any of you to risk your lives in ways you never agreed to." The historian spoke softly. "Commander, they need someone with strong resolve. Someone who carries responsibility. Someone who can handle the weight." Mira understood where the historian's words were going even before Elias did. She lowered her gaze. Elias sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're saying it has to be me. No one else can do it," Mira said gently. "You are the one who called for this, the one who believed enough to send us. They will listen to you. They will trust you. Elias looked down at his hands again. His life had already been shaped by sacrifice years of leading, protecting, losing, and trying again. He knew the risks of war. He knew the risks of leadership. But this was different. This was stepping into a path no human had walked in ages. After a long moment, he spoke. If this is what our world needs, I'll do it. The room remained silent, but Myra felt a mix of respect and sadness wash over her. No one cheered. No one questioned his decision. They all knew it was the only choice left. The team prepared to return to the desert the next morning. Soldiers gathered to help them load supplies, though many of them paused to speak quietly with Elias, wishing him strength, offering gratitude, or simply sharing a silent nod. No one treated him like a hero. They treated him like someone who carried a burden on behalf of them all. The drive back felt different this time. The sky was cloudy, and the air carried a cool breeze that softened the harshness of the desert. Elias sat in the back of the truck, watching the dunes roll by, thinking about the choice he had made. He wasn't scared, not in the usual sense, but he felt a deep weight in his chest. He wondered what it truly meant to be an anchor. Would it hurt? Would he lose himself? Would he change in ways he couldn't predict? Mira sat across from him. She watched him quietly for a moment, then said, "I wish there was another way." He gave her a small smile. There always comes a moment when someone has to step forward. This is my moment, I think. She didn't argue. She knew he was right. When they reached the ruins, the air once again felt strangely still. The stone circle remained untouched. The shimmering doorway still flickered faintly above the ground, as if the ancient ones were waiting patiently. Elias stepped toward the center of the ruins. Mira and the others stood behind him, offering silent support. The glowing figures appeared again, emerging from the pillar of light with the same calm presence as before. The one who had spoken earlier moved closer. "You return," the being said, its voice echoing inside their minds. "Yes," Elias replied. "I understand your requirement. I am ready to be the anchor." A soft ripple moved through the group of beings, as if they acknowledged his courage. The air brightened slightly, and the light from the doorway extended toward Elias like a soft breeze. "Your choice is freely given?" The being asked. "It is," Elias said firmly. Myra held her breath. The historian placed a hand over his heart. The being raised an arm, not a hand exactly, but something shaped like one, and a soft glow extended toward Elias. The light wrapped around him gently, like warm water touching cold skin. Elias didn't flinch. He kept his eyes open, breathing steadily. His body didn't lift off the ground. He didn't shake or cry out. Instead, his expression softened, as though a weight lifted from his shoulders, even as a different one settled in its place. Mira watched closely. She saw something change in his eyes, not pain, not fear, but a kind of deep awareness, as if he could suddenly sense something far beyond the human world. The being spoke again. "The bond is formed." Elias nodded slightly, though his eyes were distant, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. "You will feel our presence," the being said, "but you will not be alone." Then something incredible happened. The light around Elias widened, stretching beyond him like a wave spreading across the ruins. The ground brightened, the symbols on the stones glowed fully, and the air trembled gently. Mira felt a faint vibration, soft, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. The beings looked up at the sky. Their forms grew brighter, more defined. Their presence felt heavier, but not threatening, just powerful, ancient, and deeply rooted. "We are here now," they said in unison. "We walk with you." Elias blinked slowly, grounding himself. When he turned to Myra and the others, they saw that he was still himself, but something new flickered behind his eyes. Strength, yes, but also a strange calmness, as if he felt connected to something greater than anything he had known. Mira stepped forward. "Are you all right?" He nodded. "Yes, I can feel them. Not inside me, more like beside me. It's hard to explain." The being nodded approvingly. "The bond is true. Through him, we can reach your world. We can help restore balance." The air shifted. The ruins glowed brighter. The wind picked up gently. Something was changing. Something enormous. Elias looked at the beings, then at the horizon. "It's time," he said quietly. "Let's go home." And for the first time since the war began, the world felt like it had a chance. The return journey to the last remaining city was unlike anything the team had ever experienced. The desert no longer felt empty or harsh. The air carried a gentle hum, soft but steady. It seemed to follow the truck wherever it went. Light shimmered in the distance, not just from the sun, but from a presence that could not be explained. Elias sat quietly in the back, his eyes occasionally closing as if he were listening to a world no one else could hear. The Ancient Ones were with him, and through him they were moving with the team. Myra watched him from across the truck. She could see the subtle glow in his eyes, faint at first, then stronger with each passing mile. The assistants and the historian were silent too, each absorbed in their thoughts. They felt the weight of what had been done and the hope it brought. After so many days of fear, uncertainty, and destruction, there was now a strange sense of calm. It was fragile, but it was real. The city lay ahead, a shadow of its former self. Buildings were damaged, streets were cracked, and the few remaining people moved cautiously through the ruins. War had left its mark everywhere. The army units that had once defended these streets were gone, leaving only civilians who had learned to survive in silence. Yet even in this broken landscape, hope flickered in the air, and the presence of the Ancient Ones seemed to amplify it. As the team drove in, word spread quickly that Elias had returned. People came out cautiously at first, watching from windows and alleyways. When the truck finally stopped in the city's main square, a small crowd gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. Mira, the historian, and the assistants helped Elias down, giving him space. Even standing, he radiated something different, a quiet authority mixed with calm energy that seemed to reassure everyone around him. He raised a hand, not commanding but acknowledging the crowd. The soft hum around him grew slightly louder, and the citizens instinctively fell silent, listening. Myra could see children peeking from behind walls, adults leaning forward, and even a few soldiers who had survived the attacks watching closely. No one had seen anything like this before. Elias spoke, his voice steady but gentle. "We have been through a time of darkness," he said. "Our world is broken, our cities destroyed, and our people scattered. But we are not alone. Something older than us, something greater, has come to help." The crowd blinked, uncertain. Some whispered to each other, trying to make sense of his words. Others held their breath, drawn in by the calm authority of his presence. Mira could see the glow around him flicker faintly as the Ancient Ones answered, their voices subtle, like a soft wind in everyone's mind, giving reassurance. "We will help you rebuild," Elias continued. "Not through magic alone, but by guiding us, strengthening us, and showing us what we have forgotten. But we must also take responsibility for ourselves. This is only the beginning." A murmur ran through the crowd, hope mixed with fear. But slowly, more people stepped forward, their curiosity stronger than their caution. The presence of the Ancient Ones reassured them. They could feel it not with their eyes, but deep inside, like a vibration in the heart that said they were not completely alone. For the first time in years, people dared to imagine a future. The team set up a command center in the city square, not for war, but for coordination. Mira and the historian began organizing the remaining knowledge from old libraries, archives, and ruined buildings. The assistants helped the civilians gather supplies, assess damages, and plan for rebuilding. Everyone worked together under Elias's calm guidance, with the Ancient Ones subtly influencing each action, making it more precise, more effective, and more hopeful. Days passed, and slowly, small changes began to appear. Wells that had been dry began yielding water again. Crops in the outskirts of the city started to show green shoots. Buildings were reinforced, streets cleared, and a sense of community returned. It was not a miracle in the traditional sense, but something closer: guidance, coordination, and knowledge amplified by the presence of the Ancient Ones. Elias walked among the people every day, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, letting them see that he had shared his life with something greater without fear. Children began to follow him, drawn to his calm energy. Adults asked questions and received answers that were practical and inspiring. Myra watched all this, taking notes, understanding that this was history unfolding in a way she had never imagined, history guided not by force or fear, but by balance and wisdom. One evening, after the sun had set and the city was quiet, Elias stood on a rooftop overlooking the square. The Ancient One's presence glowed faintly around him, like the last light of day. Mira joined him, hesitant at first, then standing beside him. "They're remarkable," she said softly. "But I wonder, will they ever truly leave us?" Elias shook his head slightly. "No, they never leave. That's not what they do. They are here to guide, to maintain balance. And now, they are part of us, part of our world." He paused, looking down at the city. "But humans must act too. The Ancient Ones can't do everything. We rebuild. We protect. We learn." Myra nodded. "And the bond, it doesn't weaken you?" Elias smiled faintly. "No, it changes me, yes. I feel their presence, their memory, their patience. But I'm still myself. Stronger in some ways, yes, but not less human. That's the point, I think. Balance works both ways." The next few weeks brought even more extraordinary results. Cities that had been abandoned now had a few families returning. Supplies that were thought to be lost were found. Even rival groups that had fought during the war began communicating, guided by the influence of the Ancient Ones, finding common ground, realizing that survival required cooperation, not conflict. At night, Elias would sit quietly in the ruins outside the city, meditating, connecting with the Ancient Ones. Mira sometimes joined him, sometimes observed from a distance. The light around him pulsed gently, a visible reminder that the bond was alive, powerful, and protective. At first, people were afraid to approach, but soon word spread that he brought no harm, only guidance and hope. Slowly, more civilians began walking to the ruins, asking questions, and seeking understanding. The historian documented everything. Every small change, every interaction, every moment of guidance from the Ancient Ones was recorded. He explained to Mira that future generations would not believe it unless there was written proof, even if it could never fully capture the experience of standing near such beings. But the effort mattered. Knowledge had always been the foundation of civilization, and this was the most important knowledge they had ever gathered. Months passed. The city was no longer a shell of its former self. Streets had life again. Children laughed in the squares. Families planted gardens. Soldiers, once warriors, now helped rebuild homes, repair roads, and teach basic survival skills. The presence of the Ancient Ones continued, subtle yet constant, influencing the world in ways humans could barely understand, helping humanity learn from its mistakes. Elias had grown into his role as the anchor. He no longer feared the bond. He embraced it. He felt the Ancient Ones in every decision he made, every conversation, every plan for rebuilding the city. He was still human, still fallible, still capable of mistakes. But he had guidance beyond his own understanding, and that guidance allowed him to act with clarity, patience, and wisdom he had never known before. One evening, Myra stood with him again, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, reflecting in the river that now flowed again through the city's outskirts. "Do you think it will last?" she asked quietly. Elias didn't answer immediately. He thought about the people returning, the gardens growing, the laughter echoing in the streets. He thought about the ancient ones, silent but ever present, patient but guiding. And he thought about humanity, its stubbornness, its flaws, its capacity for hope. "It will last," he said finally. "Not because we are perfect, but because we are learning. We are willing to change. And we have help. Real help, not just hope." Myra smiled. "Then maybe the war is finally over." Elias looked out across the city, the faint glow of the ancient ones wrapping the ruins, the homes, the streets. "The war may be over," he said, "but the work of rebuilding, of balance, will never end. That's the lesson we've learned. And if we remember that, we can survive anything." The night fell, stars appearing above the city. The Ancient One's presence shimmered softly, almost invisible, like distant lanterns guiding travelers on a dark path. The city slept peacefully for the first time in years. The ruins, the dust, the scars of war, all of it had not disappeared, but they no longer seemed frightening. They were reminders of what had happened and what could be avoided in the future. Myra took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure and awe. She looked at Elias, standing quietly in the ruins, and understood the weight he carried, not just as a commander, but as the living link to something ancient, something powerful, something that had always existed beyond human understanding. And through him, humanity had been given a second chance. The world was far from perfect. There were still challenges ahead, but the impossible had happened. Hope had returned. Balance had been restored, and humanity had taken the first steps toward a new beginning. Elias turned to Myra and nodded, a simple gesture carrying years of trust, courage, and understanding. Together, they watched the city breathe, alive again, and felt.